people need to wake up and realize that, like, okay, so if psychopaths exist and they're sadists and they like to hurt people, and psychopaths also love to work their way to the top of the systems where they have a lot of control, is it possible that the people that are at the top are sadistic and actually just want to kill you and hurt you? Yeah, it's possible. That's a very scary thing for people, but that's part of what I'm saying at the moment, because I feel like it's good to just be in reality.
How is your Portuguese?
Terrible.
Really?
Maybe my Portuguese is like your Spanish, It's fucking horrible. It's terrible.
How long have you been in Portugal?
It's a long story. I mean, 5 years, but the thing is, I'm not 5 years solid because I've been traveling a lot. Also, like, I did spend time here as a kid, but the thing is, my dad, who was Portuguese, was very punishing in his instruction, in his language instruction. So eventually, I think what happened is he would stop me on every word, and I was like, you know what? That's it. I'm done. As a kid.
He was trying to teach you Portuguese?
Yeah.
So it's traumatic for you.
Yeah, it's just learning languages is always hard. But because he would just correct, he taught me to drive the same way. He would literally, like, because I drove stick as a kid, so he would literally smack my leg if I didn't lift my foot off the clutch.
Oh my
God.
God.
He taught me languages the same way, where it was very punishing. So I think what happened is when it came to Portuguese, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to fucking learn this. I'm done.
Fuck the old man. I'm not going to learn Portuguese. Mm-hmm. I get it. You grew up where?
Mostly South Africa as a kid, but then I also lived I spent time in Portugal, spent time in Brazil, spent time in Canada, spent time in the US. And then eventually I kind of moved back to I moved to the US permanently around age 27. That's when the permanent move happened. But I kind of, lived kind of everywhere as a kid.
What was your childhood like? I mean, moving around a lot, but how else was it?
It was strange. You know what's funny? It was my mom's birthday yesterday, and so I was having a conversation with her about my dad, because I understood at a certain point that my dad was a spy. He was in intelligence. And so my mom said to me, though, that she only realized that after he died, when she got contacted by another intelligence officer to ask a bunch of questions about my father's death. And that's when she finally realized, oh, he was a spy, like our whole marriage. So it was weird. Like my mom and my dad were both in intelligence. My dad more permanently, my mom, sort of part-time-ish. And my dad was a radio guy as well. He was on the radio. I don't know now if that was just his cover or if that was his love as well. He had a very good voice. So it was a weird upbringing. Yeah, but funnily enough, he's not my biological dad. My biological dad, I only met when I was 18. And then I've had 3 dads. So my biological dad, who disappeared, came back into my life when I was 18. Second dad, really abusive guy, super, super horrible man. And then my third dad, which is my Portuguese dad, the spy, he came on the scene, I think when I was around 4 or 5. So yeah, I had a strange childhood,
That's so 3 dads.
Yeah.
That had to have an impact on you.
Oh, it did. I was very confused about a lot of stuff. And then my grandfather, who was this Afrikaans businessman, very, very religious, but he was like the rock, So first dad absent, second dad very abusive, third dad just like all over the place, Latin blood, very emotional. And then my grandfather just very solid, And I lived with my grandparents at various times in my life because my parents were, often different places in the world. Mm-hmm. And then I went to boarding school as well for a lot of my childhood. So I started boarding school, I think, when I was around 6. And my parents were doing, I don't know what, I can't even remember anymore. So yeah, interesting life.
Well, you are living an interesting life, a very interesting life. Just growing up all over the place, 3 different dads. And I guess I want to ask you more about that. And I'm sure it'll come up in the course of our conversation. Yeah. But you are a filmmaker, cinematographer, and
was a cinematographer. I mean, I don't shoot as much anymore, but that was my bread and butter for a long time, shooting. Yeah.
You were, why were you drawn to photography? Or was it filmmaking specifically?
A couple of things. My grandfather was a photographer, and so like I remember grabbing his camera when I was 4, and I took a picture of him, and I was so enamored at like the idea of taking this amazing machine, taking a picture of him, and it was a good picture. He framed it, later. And then when I was a kid living in South Africa, I was living with my grandparents for a while, and I had a deep sense that the country I was in was super messed up. Like apartheid South Africa, something was wrong. A lot of the adults around me didn't seem to want to talk about it, but I knew something was wrong. And I remember, I think I was maybe 8, and I was living, in the bush with my grandparents in between boarding school. So whenever I came home, I was with them, and I was listening to music. It was, Zulu drumming and dancing and kind of stuff. And I had this profound experience, which later I would say to people, I think what I had was this sort of moment of Kundalini where like this rush happened, up my spine, hit my head. And I just was filled with this astounding feeling of love and connection and everything. And I was like crying and laughing. And I thought to myself, this feeling here that I'm having here, everybody needs to feel this feeling, because then they won't like do all the horrible things they're doing to each other. So my thought was like, how do I get people to hear the music? And then a few years later, so my obsession was, I was going to build very, very big speakers so the whole country could hear. And it was a big country when you're a small kid. And then a number of years later, I was with my parents in Lisbon, where I am now, and they took me to see Star Wars. And when I saw Star Wars, I was so moved, and I realized this is how you do it. This is how you move people. So the obsession started there. And then I went to drama school in South Africa because they had a film school as well. But my obsession was to be a cinematographer. But once I made the jump to Hollywood and I was shooting a lot of stuff, I started to realize, like, you don't have that much control over stories as a cinematographer. Like, I need to like make stuff. I need to direct. So that was the ultimate destination, is to get to the point that I could actually tell the stories I desperately wanted to tell, which were not really being told in Hollywood, at that time, and still maybe not.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you had an impulse very early on. You had this awakening, and then you wanted to share it with the world. It really says something about who you are at your essence. And then you did that, I guess, with your. I don't know your entire career, but I certainly am aware of.
Yeah.
What the Bleep Do We Know?
Yeah, that was born out of frustration, because like I spent the 90s in Hollywood. And I just remember feeling like I made a few movies. I worked with a few directors I loved. I made a few movies that I thought were great. And I'd left South Africa having just shot the movie Sarafina, which I loved. I loved making the movie. It was a very powerful, important film. I got to Hollywood, and then I was just making shit.
Right.
And I made one film with one director once. There was amazing actors, amazing performances. And what the Bleep was born out of utter frustration. I was like, I have to go and make the thing I want to make. And at that point, what I wanted to make was something about consciousness, something about neurobiology, quantum mechanics. I was trying to figure out, how do you tie all this stuff together? And I was very lucky that I was introduced to a guy who had, a lot of money. And he says, well, I wanted to make a film like that as well. So we partnered up, and that film came out. And that was sort of the realization I had, like, oh, you can make films like that. It's not easy, and we had to make it very independently, and they can be powerful, and there is an audience. Because what happened is, when we were finished the film, we went to all the distributors. Nobody was interested in the film. They all said there's no audience for this film. And we're like, are you joking? So what we had to do was four-wall the film ourselves, rent theaters, show it in theaters. And eventually, around about I think it was week 15 or 16, the film just took off. And then everybody was talking about it. So that was sort of my first attempt to like create things that truly moved me, somewhat outside of the system. I mean, it got, incorporated by the system, because a lot of stuff got made like that afterwards. But that was my first sort of moment of like, okay, this is the shit I want to be doing.
I guess you believed in the film, so you weren't surprised by the success, or were you?
I think a bit of both. I think my arrogance, I led with arrogance. So I was like, you guys will fucking see. You're going to see, you know. But I was also surprised. I was like, I didn't realize how many people see the genesis for me of that film was I was going to all these weird bookstores, like these new agey bookstores that
Yeah.
were full of the weirdos, right? And I kept on thinking to myself, this stuff, this environment, this knowledge in these weird bookstores, this needs to get out into the mainstream. Because I know it feels weird, but like I feel people, maybe if they read this stuff, they would find it fascinating. So that was the genesis. I just don't think I truly grokked like how many people were going to be like, oh shit, this is the shit I've been thinking about my whole life. And somebody finally made a film that expresses some of the things I've been feeling, you know? It was both.
It's so interesting because I had a similar experience. I read Ken Wilber when I was 23, A Brief History of Everything, and just blew my mind. And I thought everybody needs to understand all of this. And then I got into Terence McKenna and went down the rabbit hole. And then I had a similar thing. When I was 35, I went to a Cornergetics workshop up at the Esalen Institute. This became my work. And it was just like, everybody's got to understand what's going on here emotionally, that we're essentially governed by our emotions. And there's a deep well of emotions inside us that we don't understand. And it's influencing everything we do, how we think, how we perceive reality, the actions we take. I mean, we're not living in reality if we don't understand this. And I became obsessed, and I ended up making a documentary series about that. So I really relate to you in that impulse and the arrogance as well. It's like, it's obvious because it just seems so fucking obvious. Like once you see it, this is the only thing to be talking about.
It's true. And also I think I'd had this obsession as a kid of like, what makes people tick, you know? And it's funny, a lot of people have said to me, oh, you should have been a psychologist and you should still be a psychologist. I have zero interest whatsoever. But I have an interest in the ideas and in getting the ideas out there. I'm so interested at what makes people tick. And I'm very interested in what makes me tick. Like every time I'm on a podcast and somebody asks me about my early life, I try not to just go rote and go like, oh, this. I try to figure out, like, sometimes with some of the questions, like what drove that thing? Mm-hmm. And is it different this year? Is my understanding different this year of what drove me to like last year? Do I have a deeper level of understanding? You know, I'm always trying to figure out like what's going on inside. Why did I make the choices that I'm making? Why am I moved about the things I'm moved by? It just fascinates me, you know, not to get like frozen and stuck in it, but I'm just constantly interested in getting down to, like, I guess, the truth.
Yeah.
Not the truth, a truth, you know?
That's all I'm interested in. Well, what do you do to help you grow? Have you been to therapy?
Yeah, I've done a lot of therapy, especially in the last few years. I mean, I did a lot of therapy when I was much younger, and then you know, got into, you know, I was in a number of cults where I wasn't doing as much therapy. I was doing more of the cult therapy. Then in 2017, you know, when I came out of the NXIVM thing, I went straight back into therapy because I was like super messed up. Right. I have found for me, because there was in the particular cult that I was in, there was so much talk therapy already. I found that when I came out, I just didn't want to talk. I didn't want to do talk therapy, but I was really interested in somatic therapy, really interested, because I feel like I had spent so much time intellectualizing things and hadn't really gotten access to what was going on. When I started doing somatic therapy and really feeling what I was feeling, I was like, oh shit, this is what's actually going on. This is what's happening underneath my disconnection, my dissociation. This is what I feel. And then as I started connecting to those things, I was able to move things, to change things, to become, I suppose, more self-aware. Because, you know, the one thing, we can get back to this, but the one thing about, there's many things about it being a cult that are a problem, but one of the things is you're living a alternate personality, an alternate facade. It's not the real you. And you have to maintain that facade in order to survive in the structure you know, of like,
Mm-hmm.
you should be beyond that shit now. You're at a certain level. You shouldn't have those problems anymore. So you start to deny that you have these issues and problems and feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found, for years, I didn't have access to what I was actually feeling.
Right.
Because there was a lot of, in essence, there's a lot of bypassing, emotional bypassing, psychological bypassing, spiritual bypassing. And then when I sort of came out of my particular cult in 2017 and woke up, suddenly I was faced with so much feeling, so much emotion, so much confusion, so much rage, so much fear, that at first I was so dysregulated I couldn't even cope with the amount of stuff I was feeling. And I had to do a whole bunch of things to try and just slow down and just, okay, this is okay. Let me feel this feeling I'm having. Let me feel this
Yeah.
feeling I'm having. I'm not going to explode. I'm not going to die. I'm not going to whatever. And then I could really start to dig in. But I mean, the reason I've done all the weird things I've done in my life is because I'm just so interested in this experience of living and all these things I'm feeling. And I was a super sensitive kid.
Mm-hmm.
So I hate to use the word empathic, but I was just super, super sensitive. Just felt a lot of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't understand why other people weren't feeling it. So at first I was like, something's clearly wrong with me. And then I was like, well, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But I was really curious about why I felt certain things that other people either were not feeling or were not talking about, you know? So I was kind of the irritating friend that always wanted to connect and like, what's going on, and if things changed in a relationship, I'm like, what just happened, because I thought I could feel a change, which I think is actually true. I could,
Did you
weirdly
feel
obsessive.
alone in that place? Like you were the only one?
So alone. I mean, look, my mom was a complete weirdo. So there was at least that at home. My mom was sensitive to the things I was sensitive to. But going to like boarding school, that was rough, man. I went to a very, very strict, very English boarding school. Stiff upper lip, suit and tie, where all these things were not talked about, So I
Right.
had this weird internal life that was very, very lonely, And I think what happened is when I started connecting with some of the books as a young boy that talked about these other realms, other understandings, psychic, whatever, I felt like, yeah, this is the stuff I've been interested in, So I started connecting with the other weirdos.
And you said you were in a number of cults before the NXIVM cult? There was more before that?
Yeah. One of them I'm not going to talk about because I just don't feel like litigation. But yeah, I mean, I think that I threw myself into like, Hinduism as a kid and Buddhism as a kid. And then there was like martial arts, and it was obsessive, and then it was, then it was another thing that I'm not going to mention. Then it was like science, like science is where it's all at,
Yeah.
And the NXIVM thing was there's many reasons, but one of the things was I thought I saw a method or a mechanism to really get in to map what was going on internally in a way I'd never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was like everything I wanted. It was like, holy shit, you can like map what's happening internally and change the map.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't understand at that point that some of the reason the map looks different is because if you start to dissociate from parts of yourself, it starts to look different.
Yeah.
It's still there. I mean, there was a cult expert I spoke to in 2017 when I woke up. I called this guy who was the enemy number one of the cult. And after he realized like I wasn't going to try and do any harm to him and I was actually awake, he gave me great advice. He said, like, all the psychological problems you went in with, they're there waiting for you. You're going to start feeling them. And I was like, really? It was true. They all were there. Everything I thought I resolved were just waiting for me on the other side to deal with. And they'd just been festering a little bit longer than I'd realized.
I guess one of the things that you must have asked yourself or confronted is like what drew you to these cults? Like what was the unconscious need or impulse? What were you longing for that pulled you into that?
Yeah. And this is the part where I say, like, I always dig back in. I go, is it different now? Because the thing there's so many things. I mean, one of the things is that I admired and loved goodness so much. But for whatever reason, and I don't know the exact reason, I don't think I felt I had it. But I had to find it. It was out there somewhere.
You didn't feel that you were good? Like, or did you feel you were bad? That there was something wrong with you?
I didn't feel like I was bad, but there was something missing.
I see.
That I had to find. It was like this weird quest. The quest was out there, and other people knew. I didn't know. Other people knew. So I was constantly looking for, I was reading books or listening to tapes or looking for mentors that could help me understand what was going on, what I was feeling, And so I'd listen to some channel, that would explain something like, oh my God, that's what I've been feeling. That makes perfect sense. Now it all makes sense, So there was that. And there was also my experience of South Africa at that time, of some of my family, was I didn't feel like I fitted in, And I felt like there was more. And I felt like the religion that I was raised in was like bullshit, But I didn't know what else there was. I remember as a kid saying to my mom, I'm looking at this, there's something I want to read. I don't know what it is. My mom got me a book on Kung Fu. I read the book on Kung Fu and I said, it's close, but this is not it. And she was great. She was like getting me books and getting me things because I kept on saying, there's something I want to know. It's not available in church, and it's not available in some of the wonderful books I was reading as a kid. And so I was on this constant search because I felt like somebody out there understands. And so I was never necessarily looking for like a big community of people. In fact, I didn't really like that. I think I was looking for some corroboration or understanding of me. And so when I would get into certain groups and I felt they got me, I would have a moment of like, oh, this feels better. And sometimes I wouldn't stay, and sometimes I would stay like a decade. But I was looking for, it's interesting. This came up recently in a podcast I did with my friend Africa Brooke. I realized recently that I've not been completely okay with just feeling and believing what I feel, independent of anybody else. Like I somehow need corroboration or agreement.
Interesting.
Like I have to do this weird detour outside of myself to come back to myself. And particularly the last few years where I've seen the world just go insane, and I've seen like some of my friends just like, I feel like they're just losing their mind. They're not making any sense. And I feel like I need to convince them of a bunch of things. This is what the conversation with Africa was about. I realize I'm trying to convince everybody else of something, because if they're convinced, then I'll feel better about what I believe.
Yeah. Well, less alone.
Yeah, exactly. This was shocking to me because I was like, I thought I was like an independent thinker. And I'm thinking, yeah, kind of, sort of, but there's this hook. There's this thing I need from the world. There's this thing I need from other people. And then I was starting to think, well, maybe that's what it's been all along, is I have to be around people that agree with me to feel really solid about the things that I believe, because as a kid, I was such a weirdo.
Right.
I was just, everybody thought I was weird, which I kind of was, kind of.
Well, and you didn't have your dad. So that has to be disorienting in some way.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, my third dad. I called him Dad. He was quite disconnected in some ways. I mean, at the end of his life, we really connected very deeply. But for many years, he was quite disconnected, and I couldn't talk about certain things. My dad also, the third dad, who I call Dad, he was also an interesting guy. I mean, his mother was some kind of a witchy woman. Like we'd go to Swaziland, which is one of the countries down in Southern Africa, and she'd give him numbers, and he'd go and gamble with those numbers, and he'd always win money. So she was like really interesting. And I asked my mom one day, because I said, so he does believe in psychic stuff, and she goes, yeah, but he doesn't want to get near it. He doesn't want to do it himself. I said, oh, can he do it himself? She says he absolutely can do it himself. He doesn't want to. And I was like, why? And then she told me the story. I never spoke to my dad about this, but she told me the story because my dad used to read palms. Dad was kind of like this interesting kind of gypsy guy. He used to read palms as a young man. And he had a friend of his said to me, "Oh, I want you to read my palm." And my dad read the guy's palm and said to him, "Oh, it says you're gonna die tomorrow," kind of thing. And I don't know what the exact story was, but the guy died the next day.
Jesus.
And my dad just shut down. Apparently, he just would never touch any other of the realms again. It's just what was physical, and that's that. So I could never have those conversations with him. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Now, when he was very ill, and I was in hospital with him because he had a bunch of heart surgery, and I sat with him for days and days and days, and I really connected to him in a very, very deep way, even though he was unconscious. What was interesting is when he became conscious again and started getting better, he said to me, "I know what you did." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, I know you sat next to the bed, and I know you communicated with me. I could feel it.
Wow.
I was like, so that was this weird like closure of like, we finally got to connect, in that place.
That's interesting. I mean, there's so many threads I could pull on here.
I know. And talking to you, I knew, by the way, talking to you, like so much shit was going to come up. We're going to talk about all kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, that whole mystical realm is really interesting to me. But like this concept, because I'm facing that, or I have been facing that as well. This idea that I feel a certain way, I think a certain way, I see things a certain way in the world, particularly what's going on right now and for the last 10 years or so. But even before that, and I have like a demand on other people that they get it. You need to understand this. No, listen to me, listen to me. And my supervisor / therapist, I mean, I'm not in therapy anymore, but I have a supervisor, and sometimes he works with my wife and I. He keeps, bringing this up with me. Like there's some place where you don't trust your own voice. Yep. And probably that it's because I can't tolerate the feeling of separation or isolation. And so what I end up doing is either like, screaming at people.
Yeah.
And then when they don't get it, or if they demonize me for the way that I think, I cut them out. Like, I'm like, fuck you, you're an idiot, which, I kind of still believe that they are, but it's not a good way to be with people because they're where they are and they've come to, what and how they think in an honest way. But it's been and I think a lot of people can relate to this. So I think it's worth talking about. Because the world has kind of split in some way. People talk about the timelines have separated, and you have one group of people seeing one reality and other people seeing another reality, and it's very disorienting and scary. Yeah, and it also makes perfect sense if consciousness is always evolving, that we're always growing and changing. And, we're doing it on an individual level, but we're also doing it on a collective level. It would make sense at some point that one group would kind of break off from the mainstream. And the fact that there's people out there like you feeling incredibly compelled, and myself as well, like, why am I drawn to this? Why do I feel like I have to explore this? Why do I feel like I have to show the world what this is? I don't think that's entirely a neurotic impulse. I think it's coming from somewhere else. Like there's some evolutionary force in the collective unconscious that is like driving this whole thing forward.
I can relate to what you're saying so much. And the question I have for myself is this a neurotic impulse, or is this like some kind of a soul yearning and urging? Because I will see things, I don't know, I'll see things on like Twitter or Instagram or something, and I say, I gotta address this. This is insane what I'm seeing. I gotta address this.
I love that about you, man.
Right? I gotta fucking talk about it. And then what I do is I try not to talk about the actual thing. I try and talk about the pattern and the metaphors and the whatever.
Yeah.
And then I question myself because I get angry. Before I actually put out a podcast about something, I get really pissed. And then I go, okay, So I want to follow my soul, but I also don't want to go down this fucking rabbit hole of neurosis of I need to convince the world as this weird thought object in my mind of something so that I can feel okay. Like,
Yeah.
why can't I feel okay with them believing the things they believe? Why do I need to convince them? Why is this troubling me so much that they think those things? Why can't I just let them be? Why can't I let them have autonomy? Why do I need to control them? So I
Because
do
it's
these
scary.
machinations.
It's scary when you're not in a shared reality with somebody.
I know. Yes, I agree.
It's
100%.
scary. And especially if you were a child who inhabited a certain reality and the adults around you didn't see you there, didn't get it. That's very disorienting as a child. And it's hard to tolerate. And you have to give it up in some way to conform to the established reality of your environment, which is also infuriating, because it's a kind of self-betrayal. So, but it's also terrifying. It's like, what's going on that, like, is it me? Am I not seeing something? Like, why are we not seeing things the same way? And as a child, it's terrifying because you think something must be wrong with me.
100%. 100% agree. And it's funny you say that because I'm just going back to like when I was younger in South Africa. You had to be very careful. When I was a teenager in my early 20s, you had to be very careful what you said in South Africa. Because like you said the wrong thing and you were like in prison.
Well,
Or,
yeah, you grew up in a very dangerous country.
very fucked up, super fucked up. I mean, I think I told the story the other day to somebody, but when I was 15, I did a maybe I was 14, I can't remember. I did a talk in class, I was in South African high school at that point. I did a talk in class about how the South African government were exactly like the communists that they said they were fighting. No freedom of speech, blah. I did the whole metaphor about everything you say you're fighting, you're behaving exactly the same way. And when I was done with it, my teacher said, I admire that you said these things. Never talk about this again. Don't ever talk about this again. And I kind of got the feeling of like, yeah, I think you're right. But I was so spirited. And so some of what I'm experiencing now in my life is the feeling of like, shit's really fucked up and why can't they see it? And I agree with everything you're saying. I think the question for me still is, am I compelled for a soulful reason or a deficient reason? And I don't know the answer to that. And I go backwards and forwards every day and I say to myself, okay, Mark, what if you just stopped? Stop trying. Just fucking live your life. Just stop. Stop this bullshit of you have some superior fucking understanding and a framework that's better. Just shut the fuck up and just let everybody do their thing. And I feel what that feels like. And it feels fucking horrible. But again, I don't know. Does it feel horrible because my soul feels like we can't do this? Or because my deficient whatever in my psychology is like, no, we're going to die, because intellectually I know we're not. But you understand what I'm saying? This is the quandary concept.
I understand exactly what you're saying. And I wrestle with this all the time. And I'm the same way. I get angry and then I want to make a video about it. And then I tone it down and I find a way to word it that everybody can hear.
I watch your videos.
Yeah. And it's like, and then I go on my other little podcast with my friend Angela, and that's where I rant and rave and let it all out. And that feels much better. But it's scary to put those out there. But it's interesting because, sometimes people respond, because I am provocative in negative ways, but I feel more relieved, and I can also see that there is a neurotic impulse in it. But it's also what I'm saying is true, and so people would say that to me. It's like, well, you're charged up. This is about your stuff. I'm like, yeah, well, I'm a fucking human being, and I don't think I can separate the two things. And this is how I fucking feel, and I'm gonna say it. Fuck.
Yeah.
And I just kind of own it, and as best I can, and I don't think you can separate it. That's what I've come to.
Maybe you're
That
right.
there's no pure, nobody's pure. You can't get to that place. It's not a thing. And so it's always mixed up with stuff, and we're always doing our best to refine it, because obviously the more it's refined, the more powerful the message will be. That said, if there's not provocation, or there's not energy behind it, nobody actually hears it. The person who's totally calm and saying the truth, nobody's watching that video, so the message doesn't get out. And so part of the work for me has been, I have to learn to tolerate not being seen, not being understood, not being demonized, trust my own goodness, and own the when people are pointing out, well, your shadow's infused in that and you're being judgmental. It's like, okay, fair enough. That's true. I'll try to do better next time. But this is what it is right now in this moment. And I want to say what I want to say. And I want you to say what you want to say too. Let's go.
I'm with you. I think the thing that still niggles at me, and I agree, 100% agree with everything you're saying. The thing that niggles at me is everything I'm doing just so that I can feel safe. Is all of this just about me feeling safe and not alone and not crazy and not untethered from something that I feel like I need tethering to? Because there's also something very terrifying and beautiful about finding, and usually this is for me in meditation, finding that the core, the center of everything, unattached to it, is so blindingly, beautifully bright and terrifying. So these are still things, but I 100% agree with what you're saying. It can be those things.
This is exactly the argument that I have with my supervisor, because he's always telling me you need, stop paying attention to the world. And I said, but I live in the world, bro. I live in the world. I understand everything you're saying, and I can go there. And I do it all the time. Obviously, when I'm in my sessions or I'm facilitating, I turn the judgmental part of my brain off and I go into that other realm of just acceptance and everything is okay. And I can hold that space, and I can hold that space inside myself anytime. I can turn it on anytime. But I'm also a human being with feelings, and I live in this world, and I have reactions and judgments, and it's like, it's okay. Like, as long as I think that the issue is as long as you have some degree of consciousness around it, and also a willingness to see where maybe you've gone too far, or you're really coming from this, what you're saying. And I think it's true, exactly what you're saying. Is it an impulse in order to feel safe? I think that is true for me, because I didn't feel safe as a child. And when I feel disconnected, when I feel not heard, when I feel not understood, then it's alienating and I feel alone. I even feel it in my relationship with my wife. Like, if there's a moment where we're not connected, or she sees things slightly differently than me, it's hard for me to tolerate. And I've had to learn to just like breathe and be with it, and not like get agitated and try to make her see something to come back into connection, because obviously it creates a conflict, and then she doesn't feel seen. She doesn't feel understood. So I think that's why I wanted to talk to you, and why I'm interested in what you're doing, because I feel we're very similar in a certain way.
Yeah. And I think the thing I'm feeling now, 10 minutes later after our little journey here, is I guess it's both. I mean, maybe we'll never know. Maybe it's both. I mean, it certainly is this urging. I mean, the one thing that I feel like, I'm very proud of the last few years. I've been through hell and been through shit and been through whatever, but I feel super proud of like some of the steps that I've made, and like standing up to a bunch of bad shit, and going through dark night of the soul, and being terribly afraid, but still stepping ahead, and then really starting to look at like the pattern, pulling back to look at the pattern of everything. And I had this moment, I think it was yesterday, where I thought, I'm so obsessed with this one life. Let me just veer into multiple lives for a second. I'm so obsessed with this one life. Like, I have families and children, maybe, that I've had in other lives. I'm so obsessed with this one life. I'm so obsessed with 2025 and all the political things that are going on. These are the most insane times. Really? I don't know. Medieval could have been insane. I don't know. 20,000 years ago could have been insane. I don't know. But I'm so interested in the patterns of things. And I think that as you know, I spend a lot of my time right now trying to help people see the patterns of like abuse and some of the dark personalities. Not because like I get off on it so much, but because I feel like there's an unmasking and sort of a waking up from childhood that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Like people need to wake up and realize that like, okay, so if psychopaths exist and they're sadists and they like to hurt people, and psychopaths also love to work their way to the top of the systems where they have a lot of control, is it possible that the people that are at the top are sadistic and actually just want to kill you and hurt you? Yeah, it's possible. Like that's a very scary thing for people, but that's part of what I'm saying at the moment, because I feel like it's good to just be in reality. Like, and there's goodness and there's evil and there's all these things. And I'm really interested in trying to wake myself up as much as I can, but also having people see like the world is a certain way, and like pretending it's not is not going to help at all. At all.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, everything you just said are the things that I've been thinking about. I mean, it's happening. Yes, we're led by psychopaths, obviously, and they don't know they're psychopaths. I don't think they're conscious of what they're doing. I mean, this idea of lizard people. Are they literally lizard people? No, obviously not. Well, maybe they are. I don't know, but
I don't fucking know. I have no idea.
But they're certainly run by their lizard brain. And you know, and I can be in judgment of that, and everybody's got to wake up to that. And then I think, well, maybe there's an evolutionary purpose to that. Maybe it's set up in this way for a reason, but maybe we're beginning to come out of that. Although I don't know. But this area is so interesting because is there anything? I guess you must believe that there's something we can do about it and things can change, or you wouldn't be doing the work that you are doing.
Yeah. So I'm clear that the delusion that these people you can get rid of these people and reform them, that's a fairy tale. I have found for me that looking into hell has been good because maybe it's the contrast, but I love goodness now more than I've ever loved goodness before. And I appreciate it more than I've ever appreciated it before. I feel like I found more of myself because I think that over the years of my life, I exchanged, pieces of myself to people I thought had more knowledge or more wisdom or more power. And some of those people turned out to be very evil, and I projected a lot of attributes on them that they never had. So in some ways, recognizing that, it was the equivalent of an evil robot I was projecting goodness on, helped me go like, well, then if I'm projecting the goodness, then clearly I'm projecting the goodness and it must be mine to project. That's what a fucking revelation,
Yeah.
So I have gotten closer to me, to what I care about, to what my values are, to what really moves me. I found more of myself. I don't know. Is that the purpose of all this shit? I don't know, but we're not getting rid of them. I also think, I don't know, just to take another detour back into parallel lives and multiple lives and shit. I really do think I haven't always been a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like I can access, whether it's other lives or this life.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I can access darkness. When I woke up and my cult leader was not yet in prison, I thought about going to get my katana out of storage, walking down the streets, seeing if I could find him. I thought about that. I thought about the things I would do.
Mm-hmm.
And, it wasn't pretty.
Mm-hmm.
It felt right.
Yeah.
It felt empowered.
Yeah.
I could be any one of those fucking Viking barbarians that people see on television. And I would have loved it.
Of course.
For a moment, until it was over. And I was looking at my hands full of blood and I'd be like, what the fuck have I done? But in that moment, I could go there. And you've talked about this before. I know you've talked about this. I've seen you talk about this. Like, I think it's really important to connect to those parts of ourselves and not to do this sort of Pollyanna splitting of like, oh, all these other evil people and I'm so good. No. Like, we're so human, right? And maybe maybe we need to go through these phases. Maybe there are phases where we need to be barbarians and Vikings and horrible, evil whatevers. I don't know. Maybe. I have no idea.
I think so. There has to be a purpose to the lower self, the shadow, the evil part of us. I've spent a lot of time confronting it within myself, my own darkness, and then the darkness in the world. And it is terrifying to confront those parts of ourselves. And one of the reasons that I think I've been able to see what's going on in the world is because I've allowed myself to know myself there, and then I can imagine what I might do in that situation. And so as soon as if it exists in me, it certainly can exist in other people. So the most horrific things imaginable, which we've seen in the past, we can point to them throughout history. This is my argument to people. You don't think that shit's going on right now, bro?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be, and it's always masked by goodness. We are the good ones. I am here to help you. Right. That's how it cloaks itself. But it's really, and which is exactly what Keith Raniere did.
Yeah.
And I guess, I mean, I have a lot to say about, because I'm just so, I was obsessed with The Vow when it first came out. I watched it again after our interview with my wife because she had never seen it. And we watched a lot of your videos where you talked about the individual episodes, which was amazing. I mean, what an amazing service you are doing. That's the thing that I want to say. Like, you got involved in this cult. You went through hell. I guess there was some degree of humiliation that you must have experienced, like the exposure for the whole world to see. And you shot a lot of that footage. You were sort of his right-hand man. You were really the protagonist in the movie. But look at the utility that it's brought the world. Like, it's almost like, obviously you weren't conscious of it, but it was in service of something beautiful and wonderful.
Yeah.
Like, it has meaning.
I wasn't conscious with any of the earlier stuff I shot, but once 2017 rolled around and we decided, let's just document everything, and then it turned into a TV series, I was conscious at that point. And there was a decision that both my wife and I made, which is like, people need to understand this. So whatever it takes.
Wow.
And so, yes, there was like this kind of humiliation to some degree. But at that point I was like, see, we didn't know he was going to go to prison. We didn't know any of that. We were like, we're going to document everything because this fucker is coming after us. And we need proof of every single thing we did. Because one day we're probably going to be in court and he's going to try and put us in prison. And we're going to need to look back at this footage and say, you see here, you see this. Da, da, da. But at a certain point, I was like, the risk of humiliation is worth it, because if this helps people see how it works, fucking great.
Yeah.
So it was this weird, like, falling on the sword kind of feeling. Now, looking back, I'm in two minds now, because I'm thinking, I think I felt like such a piece of shit that I was willing to say whatever was on my mind. And, I had no dignity at that point whatsoever. I was just desperate for people to understand what happened and for like this guy to get, put away.
Yeah.
I think the person I am now would be a little more reserved about, some of the things. And also what was difficult is, like, some of the footage you see, there's a lot of footage that people have never seen that I have. There's other people that are implicated very badly. But what happens, as in a TV show, is there's only so many characters the audience can handle. So let's just stick with Mark and the things that Mark was involved in, even though there were other people doing horrendous shit.
Yeah. Because
Mark's our character and we don't know who the characters are. We don't want to spend the energy, the 7 minutes it's going to take to set that character up. So fuck it. Let's just, it's going to be Mark. And eventually Mark looks like fucking, Himmler, But a part of me was like, okay, fucking whatever, fine. If it wakes people up, it wakes people up. And I mean, I think The Vow was the beginning of a whole bunch of, TV series like that. But it was what a fucked up time. What an insane time. And my two purposes were, three: protect everybody, get him out, put him away, and document everything. To document every single moment, I would never do it again, of course, ever.
Have you, I'm making an assumption here. Have you forgiven yourself?
I believe so. I believe I have. And I think that the ways that I got there, because I really, one of the producers on The Vow, we were having a conversation once, and he says, you know what moral injury is? And I go, I don't, but I think I have it. He goes, yeah, you do. So he explained moral injury to me. He explained, what soldiers go through. And I was like, that fucking makes sense. That makes perfect fucking sense. That I feel fucking horrible. Like there's, being ashamed about being in something like this. That's one thing. That's whatever. But then there's this feeling like I aligned myself with somebody that was beyond 180 degrees, if possible, the other direction of my values.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything I stand for got corrupted.
Yeah.
And so that was really, really hard. But what happened one day, and it wasn't even in therapy. I think it was, I don't remember what the moment was, but I remember it may have been somebody's prompting, but I thought to myself, why did I invite anybody into this thing? What did I think I was doing? And I kept on coming up with the answer. I just wanted to help. I thought this would help. Like I saw somebody who was struggling with something, so I invited them to come and take a course, take a class. I thought it would help. Mm-hmm. Everything I did, I thought I was doing a good thing. I never, ever did anything that at any point I thought, like I'm enjoying the power or this is going to hurt somebody and I think it's good. It was never that. That changed so much for me because I looked deeply at my intent. Uh-huh. And I just came up with, my whole life has been, I'm trying to figure out how to make a movie to help, how to do this to help, how to do that to help. And I thought the education of the cult would help. And then the other thing, but then I still had, so that helped the moral injury a great deal. But I still had the residue of shame. Yes, embarrassment, but a certain shame. And then 2020 came around. And at that point, when the first season of The Vow came out, I had not a lot. I mean, honestly, there was a lot of positive stuff that came out. But there's that 5% of just horrible stuff on the internet.
Yeah.
Horrible. Can't believe you're so stupid. I thought you were stupid. And I'd say, well, maybe I'm, they say, I thought you were intelligent. And I go, well, maybe I'm not intelligent. Maybe I'm stupid. They go, oh, it can't be that. It's this, that, the other. Then 2020 rolled around and I saw the world go insane. Something happened and I went, oh, you motherfuckers can't see. You can't see the cult. And suddenly all the shame went away. Because I saw how people behaved in 2020 and 2021 and going forward. Rational people suddenly becoming insane, believing every single thing on television. And I was like, oh, you guys can't see you're in a cult. Okay. And that just disappeared. So I no longer have any feelings of shame. Because why did I go into it? Like, I'm really curious. I'm really interested in stuff, And there's all these psychological reasons, and maybe there's weaknesses, and maybe there's this, and maybe there's that. Like, I'm just a human being. All those reasons. But like, that's the nature of being a seeker, maybe. You seek in fucking good places and some really stupid places.
Yeah.
That's the nature of like curiosity. So that went away. And I do think that to some degree, The Vow, the creation of The Vow, was me trying to make things right. Mm-hmm. And I struggled a lot because like during 2018, Raniere was arrested and then other people were arrested, and I would be like, I was with the FBI like all the time, my wife and I'd be so upset because like people weren't waking up. And like, but the indictment came out. Why were they not waking up? Like, what's going on? And eventually one of the FBI guys said to me, there was a superseding indictment that came out. And he said to me, I just got to tell you, if today at this point, this indictment doesn't wake them up, they're never waking up. And there's nothing you can do. And then at the end of right before trial, there were two FBI guys that were with us all the time. They said something really beautiful. One of them said to me, you never need to take on anything again in your life, ever. You never need to fight like this again. You have done a lifetime's worth of work.
Right.
You can literally just walk away now and feel good about what you've done. You have helped take down an empire. You don't have to do it again. And there was such a feeling of like that I'd completed the battle, that I'd made things as right as I could, you know? That felt really not good, like rah-rah me, but like I had done the very best I could and things were looking pretty good. And then when he finally, you know, was sentenced, I felt this feeling of like, all right, done. Now, I wasn't sure, was I going to continue fighting these battles? And turns out, yes, it's in me.
You didn't.
I'm still going. I'm still going.
Why? Why are you still going?
You know, I'm going to say something that sounds just trite. Like I'm built for it. I'm fucking built for it. You know, and I admire soldiers a lot. Like I've never been a soldier, you know. Yes, I've been shot at, you know. I've been a news cameraman, so that's the closest I ever got to combat. You know, fucking running your ass off, getting shot at, you know, in you know, terrible places. But I admire them a lot, and I see with some soldiers, like even when they stop fighting, you know that if the shit hits the fan, they're back in. Yeah, it's like they're built for it.
They love it.
They love it. They're built. So for me, I'm not physically in that way. There's something about doing the right thing. There's something about the strategy. There's something about these things that it's like feels like my purpose. You know, it sounds trite, but I can't find another way to say it. It's like why I'm here. Now, it's not necessarily what I'll always be doing. Like there's another part of me that goes, you're not always going to do this. This is the time. This is a time in your life. Yeah. There will come a time when you won't do this anymore. It's this very strong voice. And I accept that because I think that's true. I think there's going to come a time. It might be next year or the year after. But there's things I'm interested in making. They're different. They're starting to change. You know, there's all this stuff about exposing stuff and exposing darkness, but there's other projects I want to do, and they're starting to veer off, and they're veering back to consciousness. They're veering back to those you know, deeper, more profound, more beautiful things to me that I'll revisit. You know, and I don't know what happens after that. Maybe that's where it ends. I have no idea.
Well, I've had that thought because obviously we've been I mean, it's impossible to escape the politics and the things that are going on in the world, and it does feel like it's a battle. Maybe it's a spiritual battle. But I used to create for the love of the art. I wanted to create beautiful things, and I could there's a part of me that's longing to do that again, just for the sake of it, you know, and that has utility, that there's value in that. But I guess at this time, this is what we're involved in. It is what it is, and we have to serve life in the way that we serve it. Although, you know, certainly the vow, as is what the Bleep Do We Know, if you look at them, particularly the vow, you know, 30, 40, 50 years from now, and you're separated from the story, it is a work of art. I mean, it's an incredible story. It's a beautiful story, well told. And also the vulnerability of the characters, of all the characters, but, you know, I'm talking to you. It was one of the things that struck me the most, that you were willing to put yourself on camera in that way. And of course, you're recording yourself during a lot of it. And so in some sense, whether you're conscious of it or not, there's as soon as you turn a camera on, it changes something. Nevertheless, I was struck by, I don't know, the authenticity, the willingness, because you didn't always come off looking good, bro.
No.
I mean, like it was kind of amazing. So even as it is an art piece that comes out of your life. And I guess that's what I keep being left with. And even Keith, like, because my wife and I talked a lot about this at the end, because she was fascinated by him. She was like, you have to interview him. You have to interview him. And because I'm good with psychopaths. Like I have no judgment, because I have that instinct in me.
I've seen some of those interviews. I'm like, right, impressed.
Yeah. I don't know what it is. They don't faze me for whatever reason. But even Keith, like on the largest, the highest perspective, like he did serve something in his evil. Like he was part of an awakening, and something incredible was created out of all the evil things that he's done. So I guess, I don't know. That's the perspective I have. Like when I really step back and look at you and everything that happened there, that there's real beauty in it. And I guess, are you able to see that? I mean, it must be hard, because you were in it and still kind of in it.
I mean, I see, it's interesting, all the reasons I went into NXIVM, the things I wanted to develop is what I developed from 2017 onwards. In the battle, I found out who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And when the battle was over, I was like, I'm very proud. Yes, it was ugly. Yes, it was messy. Fucking, snot and tears and rage, and yes, but I'm very proud of everything. And I went to NXIVM because I felt inadequacies and weaknesses inside myself. I wanted to be strong. I'm not saying this about you, because I think you do know this. You don't know how strong you are until you're faced with hell.
Mm-hmm.
You can talk as much as you want, but when you're faced with hell, then you know what you're made of. And I feel good about everything that happened. I'm not at the point, though. It's funny. I was raging about this to somebody the other day. I'm not at the point I'm saying that he was my master teacher, because fuck him. Because he had his own delusions and things. But there was something. He was this is not the right word, but he was a foil in some ways for all my noblest aspirations, because I projected all my noblest aspirations on him.
Mm-hmm.
I externalized them all. And when I finally realized who he was, of course, there was utter crisis, free fall, that sort of the free fall in your psyche. But then as the years went by, I got to recognize that all of those things, that I was the projector, all of those things are my values. And I'm making another show about another cult. And one of the subjects in that show, when I started my podcast, they said to me, I'm so happy to see that you're expressing you. And I said, oh, thank you. She said, no. I want you to understand. I've watched you now. If I look back at your work, that you've spent a lot of your life making stuff about other people, other people's greatness. It's time you do it about yourself. And I was like, whoa. I'd never really realized. So for me, creating a podcast, and for me, because the vow was a different thing, but the podcast is more just like, this is me now. This is what I care about. This is what I believe. This is me putting myself front and center. There was something very beautiful about owning what I disowned.
Right.
I don't know if you and I ever spoke about this. When I did that high level look at the advantages of what I went through, if I pull back to the oversoul view of watching my life, I see a guy who is so committed to not looking at himself as the source of all these things, but everybody else has it. So what do we do with this guy? You know, all the angels are hanging out there smoking cigarettes. What the fuck are we going to do with this guy? You know what we need to do? We need to create a betrayal so profound that it shatters him and breaks him.
Yeah.
And maybe he'll return to himself, which is what happened. That's a great thing. That is a great thing. And if it was planned, well done.
Well, maybe, yeah, the angels, or maybe it was an unconscious part of you that planned it, like that you needed to go through that some unconscious part of you was seeking it so that you could finally come home.
I mean, I don't know the reason, but the result, I mean, I'm so much happier and so much centered. Yes, I still have my things and my whatevers or whatever, but like I'm turning 60 this year, you know? And I'm feeling pretty good about myself, you know? Feeling pretty good.
Well, as I said, you've lived an interesting life and you've had quite an impact. I want to go back to something. You're projecting your own goodness onto Keith, which makes sense to me. Your own disowned goodness and genius. But you couldn't see his darkness. So then the obvious question is, in the place where you couldn't see his darkness, was it also where you couldn't see your own?
Well, no, because the thing about this organization and many of them is you were constantly rooting out your own problems.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole system was designed to where you're broken. You need to figure out what to, you have these deficiencies. You have this God-sized hole. You have this. You need to dig in there. Like we did this one retreat once that he was running, and he said he had this intake sheet, and he said, I want you to write down 3 times you've done a selfless thing, a powerful selfless thing. You sit there, you write down, I had 3 things. I think one of them I felt really, really good about, And then he went to each one of us and he showed us how each of the things was actually not selfless. It was completely selfish.
Mm-hmm.
It was really all just about us. So you don't have a selfless bone in your body. You don't have any nobility at all. You're just lying to yourself about your nobility. You're full of shit. You're a liar. That was the tone of the education.
Right.
So you're a piece of shit. You have all these unresolved things. You have things buried that need to be pulled out. So like you were constantly looking at your own darkness.
Right. Well, but in a distorted way, because that's his own projection, obviously.
Yes. And I mean, he would do things like where, if somebody, walked out of one of his talks, he did this to me and he did it to other people. He'd say things like, I don't think you can repair that in this lifetime, kind of thing, And like now you're like, you know what? I'm going to slap you. Fuck off. But when you're in that, that rigid structure of, control and like ranking and everything, and the head honcho says that, and you recognize there's something that he can see I can't see, you're not consumed being a sensitive soul trying to figure out like why you did what you did and how to fix it so it doesn't happen again. Mm-hmm. So you're constantly mining for your own shit.
Yeah. I wonder if one of the things that's happening, I mean, the astrologers say this, we are in the age of Aquarius and coming out of kind of collectivism into more the age of sovereignty, personal sovereignty. And that doesn't mean we're all necessarily separate, but that we can be together, but also be sovereign. We don't need to betray ourselves anymore for the collective. We can all be together, but be ourselves, which I think is a beautiful ideal.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. But there is this strong impulse, and of course, we see it right now for these powerful leaders to tell us what to do. And we imbue all of these traits on them because it feels it's safe. It's like daddy is going to take care of everything. Daddy knows. Daddy's leading us. Daddy's going to tell us what to do. And then I can absolve myself of responsibility, which it helps me feel safe. But I think we're and it sounds like in some sense that's a journey that you've gone on, one towards deep personal responsibility, and then understanding that you don't need anyone else, that it's just you and your higher self, you and God, and that you can say what you want with your own authority, knowing that you're not going to get everything right. You're going to make mistakes. And as we talked about, sometimes the ego or the neurotic part of us is going to be infused in that, but that's okay. Yeah. But I guess that, there's something because you look for patterns. I mean, you look in the culture for what's going on, and look, why all the zombie movies, that were going on for 20 years.
I know.
And it's like, oh, then COVID hits. You're like, oh, now I know why all the zombie movies. There's fucking zombies everywhere.
Exactly.
Right.
And I'm so interested in like the way we, and this is not a judgment because like I've done this, the way we look at some figure on television who seems so confident, and I've been talking to evolutionary biologists and psychologists about what the fuck's going on, we look at somebody who's so powerful and so confident, and we suddenly feel like, everything's going to be okay. And, I've talked to a bunch of different people, but I keep on trying to feel what it feels like. And what it feels like to me is the biggest, baddest dude who can kill anybody with a look is in charge. That feels safe. Mm-hmm. If you're in a tribe, that feels really good, especially if it's a psychopath.
Yeah.
Like ruthless. He will ruthlessly protect what is his, and you are his, and he will destroy anybody, and he's the meanest motherfucker ever. There's this weird feeling of comfort, of almost like this warmth, like you're back in the womb, being taken care of. And I think to myself, is that what I see? Do I see people looking at figures that are in charge, and it's like their brain goes offline. Mm-hmm. They just believe everything that's being said. I'm like, that's bullshit. Just because they're saying it. Do you know what they did last week or last month or last year or whatever? But I see that pattern. And so I keep on thinking, and our mutual friend, Richard Grannon, and I have discussed this, there is a waking up. There's a growing up happening right now.
Yeah.
Growing up means you stop fucking thinking mommy and daddy have got their shit together, because they don't. Mm-hmm. And you start growing a pair, you start growing a center and a core and a spine and a sense of self. Because I see a lot of the silly things I see happening, in the world on the news. It's very childish people that refuse to be responsible for their life. So I feel like if it's true what you're saying about the age of Aquarius, not you're saying, I mean, everybody said it, but if it's true, people talk about the shift in frequency, and I go, well, maybe that's true. And maybe anything that is not that has to get amplified. I was thinking about, somebody who, you would know this very well, somebody who has difficulty accepting love or accepting compliments, and if you are very warm with them and you tell them how you feel, and they have that pattern, like all their shit comes up. It's almost like the beauty and the light that you transmit towards them. The fucking demons start to, get upset and freaked out and everything, and I keep thinking, well, maybe that's what's happening. Maybe the, I don't know, age of responsibility or wisdom or whatever is going to accelerate all the shit. I mean, I know the people that I spend time with, like let's say at work, if anybody there has sort of a narcissistic bent, and I'm just me and I fucking shine, it just drives them insane. Mm-hmm. They just fucking hate it. And the more I step into me, the more they hate it. And I know it because sometimes I've watched myself trying to pull back, because I know that I have to be careful about the way they react. So I'll pull myself back to make things, seem better.
Yeah.
And then I'll be like, the next day I'll be like, don't do that. Just be you. And the next day I'm me, and the person just, you know? So I don't know. There's something about that exposure to the light, or some of the brightness maybe in the world, that's causing, because don't you think things look more insane than ever before? Like it's crazier by the day?
It does seem insane to me, and I agree. There's been insane times throughout history, but this has to be the craziest time, just because of the interconnectedness of the world and the internet and the access to all of the information, and that we're constantly glued to our screens with updates every 5 minutes, and what that does to our brains, and how it's so easy to be hypnotized by it all. So there's that layer, and then I think the other layer is, just again, like personally and collectively, you don't change radically without going to hell and back. It's just not a thing. You have to go out of control. I mean, that is the basis of somatic psychotherapy, really, which you talked about earlier. And it's the thing that I'm always trying to convince people of indirectly when I'm working with them, is at some point you're going to have to lose control. You're having to lose control of the pattern that you are attached to, that you developed in order to feel safe in the world. You have to let go of that. And it's going to be terrifying, and you're going to have all kinds of resistance about it, and you're going to kick and scream, and you're going to maybe, project the fear you have onto some external enemy and make them bad, and you're going to fight them. But really, you're just fighting your own internal fear. And eventually, you're going to have to let go and enter the void, and feel what that is, and trust that there is something beautiful waiting for you on the other side. That's sort of the arc of how I think about healing. And I think that's what we're going through in the collective. We're in the middle of an ayahuasca ceremony. And people are purging and not knowing, and you don't know when it's going to end. I don't know if you've ever drank ayahuasca, but very often there's this feeling of like, I'm stuck in here forever.
Yeah.
I'm never going to get out of this. This is never going to end. You really can lose touch with reality. But of course, it always does end. But that I think a lot of us are caught in that illusion right now. And I think it's also one of the reasons that I was drawn to my work. Like I said, like there was something. Why did I leave? I had a pretty good career going in Hollywood and making lots of money and working with interesting people, to go off and do this weird therapy. Like, and lots of other people are doing that, and you're doing your own thing. Like what is happening that people are drawn to that? And I think it's because people do need to wake up and then help other people wake up, because we're going through this insanity and we need guides and shamans to help people get through it, because it is a fucking crazy time. And unfortunately, sadly, not everybody is going to make it through. That's just a reality that I've had to come to terms with. Like, I have old friends who are just rooted in things, and they think I mean, a lot of people think I'm fucking nuts. Lots of people think I've lost my fucking mind. And that was scary for me at first. And now I've just had to accept it. And that, which is also part of the move to sovereignty. Like, I can hold on to myself and hold on to my goodness in the face of not being seen and understood. And that is actually a very powerful place to come from. And that's really what I've been, my own personal work, but also what I try to teach.
Something that happens in Portugal and Spain is the Sahara dust. Sometimes the wind blows from the Sahara across the Mediterranean and hits Portugal and Spain. Today's the day. The sky's like brown, and like the dust is just everywhere. So I think that's part of my coughing fit.
That's interesting.
It's insane. It's insane.
What's life like in Portugal?
It's good for the nervous system. Let me tell you that much.
Calmer?
Yeah, it's calmer. It's like less insane. It's simple. It's in many ways like Mexico to some degree, I think. It's simpler. Yes, there's a lot about it that's kind of more primitive. It's this weird like first world in the city, but the minute you're outside the city, it's like third world. It's less. I think they're just less consumed here with who you are and what you do and like what your job is. Nobody cares. When the vow was coming out, we were in a tiny fishing village. Nobody knew who we were. It was great. And then a journalist bumped into me in Lisbon and like said, "Hey, I want to write an article on narcissism." And then I said, "Okay, sure, yeah, we'll talk." I didn't realize it was like the biggest magazine in Portugal. So suddenly, everybody knew who I was, but there's something very anonymous. It was particularly when the vow was coming out. It was really, really great to be here because nobody knew anything. We didn't have to have that discussion with people. Because a lot of what happened after the vow came out, especially when I was back in America, which has been a plus and a minus, everybody wanted to tell me their story.
Right.
Because, and I think it's true, there was a certain vulnerability, I just let it all hang out. So people felt, oh, I can tell him, I know him. Let me tell him everything. Now, to some degree, it's been great because in terms of film projects, when I reach out to people that have been victims of certain things, they'll talk to me, because they'll feel like I'll understand. But sometimes, you bump into people in the street, as you know, because you've had that a lot more than I have. They feel like they know you. And so when they've seen you go through something that's very traumatic that they can relate to, they want to tell you everything. And that at first was very hard because I was still, pretty dysregulated for quite a while. And I was still having panic attacks and, freaking out and a lot of stuff. I would just get overwhelmed kind of easily.
Yeah, I can imagine. And how are you now?
Much better. I mean, I dream a lot now. I didn't for a while. I dream a lot now. And a lot of what I'm dreaming about is I'm back in a situation where I'm with the same people again. And I think part of the reason is because I've been looking at, I'll be in a certain situation in my life now, and I'll say to myself, not what does this look like? You'll understand this. What does this feel like?
Mm-hmm.
This feeling I'm having with this person, what does it feel like? And I go, oh, I felt that with that person in the cult, and I felt that in boarding school, And so the somatic entry into the pattern, the story. And I find as I think about those things, I start to process them in my dreams. So my dream life is very, very rich. And sometimes I'm kind of exhausted when I wake up. But it feels a bit like a dream now. Everything that happened feels a bit like a dream. And so sometimes when people talk about the vow, my wife and I'll be like, Jesus Christ, what a weird thing we went through.
Yeah.
That's so weird. There's been enough time now that we look back at it like the story.
Yeah.
This very odd, bizarre thing that happened,
And now what are you working on now?
Yeah. So basically in terms of film, I have this film I'm finishing, which was called Empathy Not Included. Now it's called The Narcissist Playbook. That'll be finished this year. That's interesting because, we talk to victims of narcissistic abuse. We talk to clinicians, but then we also interview self-confessed narcissists, sociopaths and psychopaths. And that experience of interviewing them has been amazing, absolutely fascinating. One of the reasons is because I never got any closure with Keith Raniere. Like in court, he never admitted to anything. So I just had what I thought was going on in his world internally. When I got to interview all these self-confessed people, I got to map out what I think was going on with him. And it was very healing in some strange way. So that film should be coming out this year. I'm working on another sort of undisclosed cult project. And then I have some other projects that I'm doing as well, and I'm beginning to get started that are going to be, going a little bit away from the darkness. I've spent a lot of time in darkness. I have spent a lot of time, interviewing some pretty evil people and listening to a lot of people's pain. I also started, which I thought I would never do again. I started mentoring people again, working with people, one-on-one, which I never thought I would do again. I felt so afraid because I have accumulated a lot of knowledge and wisdom, over the years. And, the funny thing about cults is you work with a lot of people. A lot.
Well, the NXIVM stuff on the surface it's great.
Yeah, I mean, until you get deep in,
fantastic. Yeah,
until you get deep in,
concepts were fantastic.
Yeah, so and the thing I recognized about myself, my whole life is whenever I see somebody that they have a dream but they're afraid or they don't want to step into it, I want to help them. I want to cheerlead them. And so I find in the mentoring work, working with people that have had big dreams, big dreams. And they know there's something in the way. They know there's something.
Yeah.
I love working with them to just help them figure out what that thing is. And what I'm finding more and more, and this is true of all of us, it's true of me, I think it's true of other people. Sometimes it's not that we have to do something. Sometimes it's that we have to take the foot off the brake.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not aware that our foot's on the brake. And so when you can help somebody, as I'm sure take their foot off, and suddenly life just moves, that's super, super exciting. So, most of my time is consumed with the film stuff. I'm, doing some of this mentoring work, and then I have my podcast, which keeps me pretty busy. Which I love doing. I mean, you've been on it. It's called WTF is on my mind, and the reason for it is because I didn't want to pigeonhole myself to anything. I literally will talk to anybody I'm interested in talking to, which actually I think you do too. That's what you do as well. Sometimes people don't like who you talk to, but you do anyway. I don't talk to as controversial figures as you do, but I put people on sometimes because I disagree with them and I want to hear what they think. And people get super upset, but I'm just really interested in understanding, what is the worldview of this person who believes these things and says these things, which I think is interesting, as somebody like yourself who's been an actor. That is so interesting. So, like myself as a director, that's so interesting to me because when you write, you have to inhabit these perspectives.
Yeah.
But my first love is making movies, and then I wouldn't say it's my second love because concurrent with that is just I want to help people.
Well, that is really the intention of your movies to inspire and help and enlighten them, which is it feels all connected.
Very,
to me.
Yeah. Very connected. And
go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was saying, I think the thing that I've been really thinking about recently was funny. It was a psychopath who called me out on this. I think I've had this view of a utopian world. And this psychopath said to me, you people like you are the most dangerous people, you utopianists. And I thought about that and I was like, fuck, he's right. We're very dangerous. And so I think I've disabused myself of the notion of utopia. But I'm still left with okay, there is no such thing as utopia. But let me just do everything I can just to make things better, and by better, I mean to take a journey where I connect to myself deeper. And if I can help other people connect to themselves in a deeper way, that's great.
Yeah. What have you, I mean, it's a huge conversation, but just to touch on it a little bit, and I think it is relevant. I mean, this idea of narcissism and everybody's talking about it. I mean, Richard's been talking about it for years, and he talks about it really, really well. And you got confronted with a psychopath, but it's a form of narcissism, extreme narcissism. Mm-hmm. We're starting to understand, as you discussed, that it's everywhere. Our leaders, to some degree, to varying degrees, are mostly narcissistic.
Yeah.
What is going on? Like, what have you learned about narcissism from all the experience you've had, and what is the intention of the film?
Let me start with the first part. I think I keep looking at narcissism now. Well, now I look at it as like it's a profound disconnection. Like, I think there's some people that they don't have that. They're born without the connection, right? Mm-hmm. There's something going on with the brain. But with some people, I see that there was this decision they made to shut themselves off from themselves. Almost like, I'm going to protect me from everybody else. And then they ended up losing access to themselves as well. And then there's this weird, and I don't talk about it in the film, but there's this weird spiritual component of like getting so in the darkness and the hatred and the self-hatred that they despise anything that's other than that, anything that's bright and light. They despise it. And they want to break it. They want to have it not exist in the world. And then there's, and then it goes into a kind of a sadism. So, but I do see the common thread that I'm seeing more and more as I've interviewed a lot of people now is this disconnection. The dissociation it's profound, the bad shit that can happen, when human beings dissociate. And then they lose it seems with some of them, they lose the ability to access themselves again. Mm-hmm. And some of them are, I wouldn't say maybe it's kind of a grief. They're grieving what they lost, that they can't even, it's like a memory of something that existed as a child.
Yep.
But they don't even know what it feels like, but they're grieving something that's gone. And they hate that it's gone. And they hate the world that it's gone. And now they want to hurt the world. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the things that I didn't realize when I started, diving deep into this thing. And as far as the film goes, I mean, there's a couple of things I'm trying to do. The one is I'm trying to have people see the pattern of how it works. I want people to see a film where they go like, oh, that's what's going on. I'm not crazy. This is what's actually happening. This is what I've been through, or this is what I'm going through. And the other thing is I want to dissuade people from the notion that somehow these people can just be loved back into health.
Yeah.
Evil exists. You can't love these people back into health. You will just get hurt. And it's just good to know that it exists. And it's good to know that this pattern exists, in relationships and in churches and in corporations and in governments and in, people that run governments. It's all the same pattern. So, in some ways it sounds kind of morose, but what we've been seeing in some of the sort of internal screenings that we're doing, people walk out going, holy shit, now shit makes sense.
Right.
There was a producer who saw a sort of rough cut in LA recently, and at the end of it, she said, "If I'd seen this film 25 years ago, my life would have been different, completely and utterly different." So in some ways, it's a warning. In some ways, it's a roadmap. I want people to see how it works, not just to be like, "Oh, these people are awful," because there's a great moment. I haven't actually talked about any of the content of the film, but this is a good moment. There's a great moment towards the end of the film where our friend Mr. Richard Grannon said, it's not just the narcissist and the psychopaths that are a problem. It's also us who follow them and worship them.
Well, that gets to the heart of it, because if I'm working with clients who have been seduced by narcissists and psychopaths, obviously I want to validate their experience as much as I can, right? Because they don't know what's going on, and it's hard for them to really see the person. And so they first need to understand like what actually happened. But once that understanding is achieved, then the next thing I want to help them do is, what was a part of you that allowed yourself to be seduced? Because no seduction happens without some kind of unconscious agreement.
Yes.
And what is it inside us? And all of us, I think, have this that allows ourselves to let go of our sovereignty, our own personal authority, and be seduced by these narcissists.
Yeah, it's an important point, and I have this conversation with people sometimes, and people say, "Oh, that's victim blaming." And I'm thinking, no, it's not victim blaming. It's like everybody has something they think is missing. Everybody. And like it drives us to do. I mean, how many times have people jumped into relationships because they thought they were missing somebody and that person would complete them? It's the same shit.
Yeah.
And like you go looking for shit relationships because you feel like you're a piece of shit and like somehow they'll make everything better. It's the same kind of pattern. I mean, for myself, the abdication of myself is what made me susceptible to people that I thought had what I needed, and the abdication of self, I was attached to abdicating that part of myself.
That's right.
Those parts of myself. I didn't understand. I was attached to it. It was a story I was holding on to. Like I had to go through the work to realize like, no, it's not just like the way I'm built. I'm holding on to it. And the minute I let go, I was like, Jesus Christ, I had no idea that was an option,
Yeah.
And maybe it needed to get bad enough that a therapist could say, challenge me on this and be like, no, I need it. I need to abdicate myself, And then you listen to yourself going, that is insane what I just said. Which isn't that a great moment when you hear that from people? That's insane. Because like half the work's done. They're probably going to defrag now.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that it's almost impossible for any of us to escape a degree of narcissism because particularly American culture is so narcissistic. And so we all have a degree of narcissism, I think. I don't want to speak for you, but in the sense of on the simplest level, and maybe there's semantics and definitions here, but the denial of the true self and the presentation of a false self, and then the intention to try to, in some way, control our environment so that our false self, the image, is maintained, is a kind of narcissism that I think we all, to varying degrees, engage in. And it's not that we can necessarily, I don't know, perfectly heal it, but just to become like, how are the ways that I'm trying to control shit and control other people?
Yeah, I'm with you. But I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago with a researcher in Australia. And I was having this conversation with her about narcissism is on a spectrum. And she's like, no, hold on. It was interesting because I agree with what you're saying. I agree, the false self. But also I look at that and I go like, is that narcissism or is that just a natural, like when you're a teenager and you don't want to admit any, you pump yourself up and maybe you don't grow out of it. Maybe you do grow out of it. I go, is that narcissism? Okay, maybe. But that's just part of maybe the journey of, the ego and the self, because she said something interesting. She said to me, there's predators and there's non-predators. There's people like that are trying to have a false self and they're predators.
Right.
They're hurting people. Mm-hmm. And then there's people that are not predators that are like, they do the same kind of shit. And then the thing that was so interesting, she told me, was that the person who came up with the narcissism on a spectrum thing, the academic who came up with it, is himself not a good person. And her whole argument was that some of these people are creating structures to protect themselves. And I was like, well, that's interesting. That's very, very interesting.
Well, so narcissism is tricky, right? It wants to hide from ourselves. So narcissists won't let themselves know they're narcissists because they're masters of rationalizing.
Yeah. I think the one thing, it's funny, I'm about to do a podcast episode in 2 days' time just on my own about this, but like one of the things I see these personalities do is they have you fixated on yourself. So the only issue with me about the narcissism is on a spectrum and we all have it thing is the super sensitive people are like, oh my God, I have to root this out. I have to get rid of this. And the person running the show is like, my work is done.
Right.
They're a self-cleaning oven. They're never going to stop searching for how much of a piece of shit they are. All I have to do is say to them, this moment that they had a sense of self and they drew a boundary. Do you know, David, that that's a narcissistic impulse you just had to assert yourself? Why do you need boundaries?
Right.
And now you're fucking in a spiral of like, I don't want to be the kind of person that, that does that and is afraid. And maybe I don't need boundaries. Not that you would say that, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, in the case of what was going on in NXIVM, it was the awakening or the challenge to keep going deeper into yourself and look where you're distorted. It's shaming. Like the energy of it is shaming, like there's something wrong with you. And the way I try to frame it with my clients is, one, there's nothing wrong with you. You just have a defense.
Sure.
And the defense evolved naturally. There was nothing you could have done. And at your core, you are good.
Yeah.
But the defense sometimes will act out in unconscious ways that can be destructive and protective, and that protection, sometimes cruelty or control, is a very effective mechanism to keep yourself safe.
Yes.
And so then you have to kind of thread that needle between, I want to take responsibility for that, but I also don't want to make myself bad.
Yes. And I would add to that, the other interesting thing is, when you make somebody aware that they've done a cruel thing as an act of protection, most people feel bad.
Yeah.
The true narcissist with a pathology is like, I don't see the problem.
Yeah.
Because I know for myself and for a lot of my friends, when you realize you've done something shitty, it's tough. There's a lot of layers to that of like, part of you doesn't want to admit it. Like, I don't want to apologize for that because then they'll, this, that, and the other. But like, you feel shit about doing shitty things.
Yeah, regret, remorse, those are healthy, and there's healthy shame. But yeah, maybe that's the way to differentiate it. The narcissist is unable to feel remorse.
Yeah, but I like what you said, because it's true what you said. It was just constant shaming happening in the cult.
Yeah.
Like the cult leader disowns their shame, projects their shame on you, the cult member. And now you're consumed with shame that's not altogether yours. You're taught you have to be ashamed about these things that you didn't realize before you were supposed to be ashamed about.
Well, that's exactly what happened in 2020. And that's why I had such a strong fucking reaction to it. And people were saying, well, yeah, but the virus is dangerous. Yeah, but I don't give a fuck. If you're using shame to try to control me, you are my enemy, and I'm not listening to a fucking thing you say. And that's what happened. And unfortunately, because a lot of people have deep-rooted shame, they are easily controlled through shame. And so the path is to liberate yourself from that shame. Again, self-responsibility, understand that we're at the places you've done harm, make amends, regret, and remorse, but liberate yourself from the shame. And then you can no longer be controlled by the narcissist who's trying to shame you. Because the way that I see it, if I go into my psychopathic defense, because that is my primary defense, it's like they're masters of energy, and it's why we make good therapists, because we know how to read energy, and we know exactly where somebody's weak spot is, and we know exactly the thing to say to, get them. And then once we have them, right, they're under our control. And where you get people always is in that place of deep-seated shame, where they're not entirely sure of their own goodness. Of course, it's a projection, right? But that's how I see the mechanism of control.
That's interesting. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense what you're saying, because it's true. We all have shame somewhere in there, and it gets activated in these places. And then, as you know, with the whole 2020 onwards, there were behavioral scientists and psychologists working with governments to figure out how to find people's shame points.
How to control them, what to say to make them comply. And it was all through shame and coercion and control. So it's a really important subject. I know everybody's talking about narcissism being overused and all of this stuff, which I understand, and not everybody's using it, and maybe I'm not even using it in a way that's discerning. But I guess it is an important conversation, and I'm glad that you're doing this work. It has to continue, because I think it is the predominant thing that we need to confront, and then to take it to what we were talking about earlier. It is the thing that must be confronted, and we must be liberated from it if we are going to go into this new age of what I'm saying is the age of personal sovereignty, where I don't need a leader. I don't need somebody to tell me what to do. It's me and God.
Yeah.
And if we can all, whatever your version of that is, your own personal higher self, and that we can all be together in that. But first we have to liberate ourselves from this idea that we need other people telling us what the fuck to do. We're no longer children, and we're no longer in survival mode as a species. So we don't need that barbarian who's savage to lead us. I mean, maybe we do. Maybe it's not going to end. Maybe it's just going to take a new form. But it seems to me, with the advent of all this technology and the abundance that's available to us, like that I just feel like something is changing, and that we're evolving, maybe even to a new kind of transhumanist species. I don't know. It's not in our control, but something is happening that's real. And I think that the work you're doing, the work I'm doing, the work Richard is doing, and so many other people are doing, I think it's important and necessary. So I guess I'm just saying all that to say thank you. Thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for going to hell and back so you can help people see it for what it is, and being vulnerable and exposing yourself. It's really, I always try to look at my own life, like, again, from the highest perspective, and what's the movie that I'm making, and is it a good movie? And is it interesting? And I guess it's like the movie that is your life is fucking great, man. So well done.
It's a weird movie. It's a very weird movie, but it's a lot of fun, a lot of twists and turns. And in the end, it looks like the lead character of the movies looks like he's going to be finding himself. So, it's good.
Mark Vicente, thank you so much, man.
Thanks, my man. I appreciate the chat.
Yeah.